Conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Manager Center's TCPA regulation compliance with Noble Systems. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I would now like to turn the conference over to Henry Danzer. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Manager Center's TCPA Regulation Compliance with Noble Systems session. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Henry Danzer. I'm the Western Region Vice President of Sales for Noble Systems. I wanted to just do a few introductory comments before we get into the meat of the presentation, as it were. This is a follow-up session from what we had 3 weeks ago, which 3 weeks ago I kind of moderated that, and it was really more of a Q&A session. Questions were submitted, and we went back and forth between our attorney partner as well as some of our technical folks to go through that. This session we have it slotted for 45 minutes, and myself and I will introduce my colleague here in a second. We'll be going through a presentation. We took a lot of the questions that came up in the last session that weren't answered, and we put them together into kind of a Q&A type of format as well. So we'll go through that. And as well, if you do have, Stephanie mentioned a question and answer ability. Probably the easiest is if you look on your toolbar on the top of the Microsoft Live meeting, there's a Q&A button. So if you have a question, just click on that, and then that'll show up, and we can try to weave, depending on time, of course, weave the answers into the questions. We do have some questions at the end, and quite frankly, if we don't get through everything in 45 minutes, sometimes it's hard to gauge how long things will go. Whatever questions that aren't answered, we will answer them and get them to you. Since you guys registered, we have your email addresses, and we'll get them to you that way. Another note, just as a follow-up as well, this is being recorded, as I think Stephanie had mentioned, and it will be on our website. It'll take a few days to get it up there, but so after this is over, you guys can either re-listen to it or ask some of your colleagues to listen to it. That works as well. So that all said as a background, let's just get moving. So Howard, there you go. So as you said, my name is Henry Danzer, but probably more importantly is Howard Leary. Howard is our Strategic Solutions Director, and Howard's had 15 years of experience working and consulting with companies and different government agencies looking to leverage technology to solve their business problems. Howard and I have known each other for quite a long time, and if any of you have ever worked with Howard, you understand what a technical genius he is. And like I said, he's going to be doing a large portion of the technical piece of this presentation. So Howard, why don't you introduce yourself, at least the voice, so everyone who doesn't know you could at least gather the difference between myself and you.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction, Henry. My name is Howard, and just to give our attendees a little more background, I've been working in contact centers in various roles, including sales engineer, solution consultant, and technology strategist. My role here at Noble Systems, among other things, is to conduct contact center assessments where I help companies identify technology and process solutions that improve their performance, customer experience, and really for this topic, compliance as well. So in that area, I focus on things like FCC compliance, TCPA, HIPAA, and high-tech. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll talk more in the presentation. Henry, back to you.
Thank you. We want to move on to the next slide. Okay. So this slide, it's a little bit of a disclaimer, and really what we're saying here is that this presentation is intended for informational purposes only, and really the key here is it's not to be construed as legal advice. Neither Howard nor I are an attorney. So obviously we're giving you the best ability of information we have, but if you're getting to that level of details, there are definitely some attorneys within your organization you may want to speak with before making final decisions. Obviously TCPA is very complicated and I should even say highly emotional within the business community right now. All right, next slide, Howard. So once again, the objective here and how we're going to format this is, we're going to highlight the evolving FCC interpretations and requirements for the TCPA and introduce solutions from Noble Systems. So what we're going to do is these 4 or 5 topics you see are the ones that when we kind of benched the questions together, and we looked at what the major concerns were. They were coming around compliance reporting, opt-out mechanisms, express consent, existing business relationships, the TCPA wireless compliance, dialing, and of course, we always have, if we have time, we'll have some additional questions on the end. So as we go through this, we'll go through each of these topics individually. We'll outline a little bit of what FCC and TCPA are saying about it, as well as a little bit about where it's been and where it's going. So we all have a little perspective of what you knew in the past may not be as relevant as some of the changes, because the marketplace is changing quickly here. And then Howard is going to take that point, that issue, and talk a little bit more in technical detail of how we can solve some of those problems. So that said, let's go on to the next slide, Howard. So FCC interpretations and requirements for TCPA. So I think this is why we're all here, is it's increased class action liability. And I think if you look at this slide, I think what it shows is there's not only is there a financial penalty for making these mistakes, the penalties are getting more and more expensive, and they kind of they get more expensive as you have additional penalties. So I see that in the marketplace as well. A lot of people are very concerned about that. And if you look over on the violations and the statutory penalties, you see that the number of violations is increasing quite a bit. So one thing everyone sees this as being it's a huge issue, and trying to limit the results of this, or limit the financial repercussions of that. Howard? And I think this is a very interesting slide as well. And really what I'm trying to point out here is if you see the TCPA timelines of recent changes, I think that the point that's most important here is how quickly things are changing, in the sense that here you've got in October 16th, we've got obviously, one second here, let me catch up here. October 16th, TCPA went into effect, and then we literally had, a 10-year, 12-year gap before they really made many changes. And then in November, there was our first reporting changes, requirements change, requiring how to report for dropped and abandoned telemarketing calls. And then a few months later, in early this year, requirements changed regarding self-service mechanisms for called parties to opt out or receiving telemarketing calls. So another change, and then of course here very recently the definitions of express consent. So obviously what we're trying to point out here is that the changes are coming fast and furious, so we've got to stay on top of them. And we will address all of these. And let's see, so here we go. So in the past, right now we're going to talk about the first topic here is abandoned call rates. So in the previous interpretation, I know you guys can read this, but it was that magical 3% of all telemarketing calls over a 30-day period. That's kind of what you were always benchmarking against. As long as you had the telemarketing abandonment rate of less than 3%, things were going all right. Of course, you also had the abandonment rate and the definition there of the sales representatives within 2 seconds, the consumers that completed the call. So that was a definition of abandonment. Now, obviously, with the change here effective November 15th, the definition of abandonment rate has changed somewhat. So 3% still is important, but it's 3% based over a 30-year, or a single campaign over a 30-day period. So the difference there, obviously, in the past it was all your calls, so you could have this large population to measure against. Now it's campaign by campaign. So once again, you have to be much more careful, much more diligent in making sure your abandonment rate stays under that 3%. And also, if you look there, the last bullet on the right-hand side, if a single campaign exceeds 30 days, the abandonment rate must be calculated for each successive 30-day period. So once again, it keeps rolling over. So you have to be very, very mindful of that abandonment rate. So that's kind of the issue. So Howard, let's talk about the solution.
Okay, thanks, Henry. So essentially what we have are a number of ways of handling abandoned calls and managing that and monitoring that within the contact center. So Noble's Enterprise Contact Center application has a pacing method that we call compliance pacing. And what this does is that when you set the compliance pacing method on a particular campaign or even at a group level, which could span multiple campaigns, that abandonment rate will always stay less than 3%. And then the way you verify that is through the campaign detail reporting, which will also provide the insights as to what the abandonment rate is for individual campaigns as well as your total for the center. You also have the ability to do what's called compliance lockdown. Compliance lockdown basically enforces those pacing rules as well as the hold messaging required by the FCC, and it prevents any unauthorized changes to those campaigns or groups based on those lockdown parameters that you would set. And that's important because you don't want just anybody to be able to go in and change messages or change pacing if you're in a compliance situation. So you can give that password capability to individuals that are appropriate for managing that. Now, we also have a way to automate alerts. So, it is an average throughout the day. You're going to have times when your abandonment rate might be higher than 3%, but in general it will be lower. And so you still want to be aware of that and be able to monitor and manage to that situation. And so the automated alerts capability within Noble's Harmony application gives you a web-based dashboard, red light, yellow light, green light types of alerts, as well as the ability to have an email sent to you or even a text message. So these are just different ways that we handle abandonment calls and securing that for compliance. Okay, back to you, Henry.
All right, want to go to the next slide? All right, so now the next requirement we're looking at is the opt-out feature. So obviously TCPA has long required the telemarketing organizations which use pre-recorded messages, sometimes called robocalls or blaster calls, to provide an opt-out in a message that gave the caller a phone number to call to register with the DNC request. Now, of course, that was pretty straightforward. We all kind of understood that. And now, as of January 14th, I think I'm being very specific here because this to me is very interesting. So as of January 14th, all calls with pre-recorded telemarketing messages must include an interactive, I think that's the key word there, opt-out mechanism, which can be automated by voice or key press responses. The mechanism must automatically add the consumer's number to the company's do not call list and then immediately hang up. Very key there. I think the next point is equally important, is that if the pre-recorded message is left on a voicemail system or answering machine, the message must include a toll-free number that connects the call directly to the automated opt-out mechanism. So once again, there's some definite changes in the wind here as of earlier this year. So opt-out is a real key. So Howard, can you explain a little bit about some of the ways Noble can handle the opt-out capabilities?
Yeah, absolutely, Henry. One of the things that if you're using Noble systems today or you're looking at procuring one, the same Noble IVR manager tool that works with the inbound calls can also be used for your automated or pre-recorded messages on the outbound call side. Users can really quickly create IVR call flows using this visual designer tool that we see here in the picture, and it includes many pre-built actions which can be configured to update database tables, for example, your do not call list. It can also allow you to transfer calls to agents, hang up, and much more. But the idea here is that it can offer you an automated self-service mechanism that will essentially allow your callers to opt out by pressing 1 or 2 or what have you, and then immediately hanging up per the guidelines that are in the new regulation there. That's pretty much the basic thing. The other major point here, I think, though, is that we can handle answering machines and human answers differently. So, for example, since the message left on an answering machine is potentially different because it has to include that toll-free number to reach the opt-out mechanism, Noble's IVR manager can then detect the answering machine and play a different message or call flow than we use for the human answered call. So in that way, you're, not leaving an answering machine a message that says press 1, to be discontinued from the list, which would make a lot of sense, right? So, Henry, back to you.
All right. So, express consent. So, you want to go to the next slide there?
Yeah, it's a little slow there.
There it goes. This is the one that, in my dealings with our clients and customers, I'm out in the field a lot, and I think this is the one that, shall I say, gives the most banter. A lot of discussion back and forth on this of what really is express consent. And I think, from some of the things that I've read and some of the things that I'm looking at, what I've seen is that the FCC is getting much stricter about what constitutes express consent. I think what we would say is, gone are the days when a company can simply rely on the fact that, a phone number, whether it's wireless or not, it was put on an application, and hey, that constitutes, that constitutes consent. Nobody believes that anymore. That's not really the way it works. So obviously, with the revised interpretation coming up here, it's much more stringent. And, I've got a couple of bolded words there, so not necessarily to read it to you, but I'll be part of it here. So prior express consent for telemarketing calls now require a prior written signed agreement, specifically agreeing to receive telemarketing or text messages via an auto dial or a pre-recorded voice. I think that's it. It's literally saying, in the past it was, they put it on an application, we're cool, everything's great. This is, no, you need expressed written signed consent on that. Now, we're talking about telemarketing here, but if you look at the second bullet point here, what we're finding is that many courts have, if you look at that last line, many courts have applied the old rule to debt collections as well. So even though a lot of the focus here is telemarketing, for those of you in the debt collection space, this is it's equally important to get a grasp on this and make sure that you truly have expressed consent. So that kind of is the issue. So once again, kind of as I volley my ball back over to Howard, you want to take a look at the Noble solution?
So I think one of the things that we'd like to just point out here is that, while we don't have a mechanism to, necessarily acquire and track consent from a signed perspective, what we do know is that the FCC has spoken, and this is something to confirm with your attorneys, but that has really spoken to the fact that you can gain consent through the e-Sign Act, which would satisfy the requirements of the revised rule. So if you obtain permission via an email, a website form, a text message, even a telephone key press, which would be something that you could do within the Noble IVR, or a voice recording, again, something that you could record either in an agent interaction or in a automated IVR self-service application, recording that underneath the FCC Order 1221, which basically gives you that e-Sign Act capability. So that's all I would say to that one.
All right, great. Going on to the next slide. Another area, it's also very, very volatile, or a lot of questions going on around it, is the term established business relationship. So, if you look at this, it kind of goes hand in glove, obviously, with express consent. So in the past, advertisers could rely on established business relationships, a previous purchase or whatever, to circumvent the need to obtain a written consent. So obviously with October 16th ruling, that's not really, it's interpreted differently now. So once again, even an established business relationship no longer relieves advertisers of prior unambiguous written consent requirements. So once again, it takes they've bought from us in the past, that means it's consent, and we're saying, no, that's not right anymore. Now you actually, like the previous slide said, you actually have to have it written. And I think the other point here is one that's maybe most concerning, is that last part of that second sentence. It says the advertisers may bear the burden of proof. So if a dispute arises, the advertiser has to bear the burden of proof and prove that they actually have consent. So once again, it's something you have to deal with. And you have to be aware of it. So that was another part of the October 16th ruling that we thought we wanted to point out to the team here. So Howard, you want to maybe take that to the next page and show about Noble's capabilities?
Yes. Yeah, and I'd also like to just point out that, so there's obviously some record keeping that has to take place within your systems of record. So your collection management system or some CRM application that is tracking whether or not you have express consent on file and maybe a scanned image of it or whatever you need from a written perspective. But when it comes to things like, the keypad press or the, some kind of an IVR log or perhaps even the recording of the person, through the e-sign act, recording the person giving their consent, those are things that you need to consider about long-term reporting. So we have a report archive server for the data elements, and we have a voice archive server for maintaining long-term records of the recordings and so forth. So those are things that are important in the solution. When you also look at managing express consent, again, understanding that your system of record would be the one that would be maintaining the written and electronic records of the express consent. When an express consent flag is then added to the download to the contact center application, your campaigns and calling lists can then be created to target those populations that already consent to pre-recorded messages, whether it be a wireline or a wireless number. But then your wireless numbers with no record of prior consent can then be filtered into manual dialing campaigns or excluded altogether depending on your strategy and approach to that. So Noble's List Builder utility is something that allows those users to define the various profiles containing the necessary criteria for automating that calling list creation. So it also helps your managers to ensure that the list creation rules are applied accurately and consistently without the need for human intervention. So you basically set up this template, this profile, and it will automatically create the list in that manner based on those rules moving forward. So, Henry, back to you.
Okay. So I'm assuming most people have heard about the Nelson versus Santander verdict, which is kind of what has got brought all this to the forefront and has got a lot of people concerned. So for those of you who haven't, I'll get a little bit of background on this and hopefully bring up a few terms that, once again, if you may or may not have heard, because there's a lot of things talked about on this. So this is something that came up with the Western District Court of Wisconsin. So it's a federal court in Wisconsin, and it was really a TCPA violation. So Santander, as the slide shows, they're an auto finance company, and they were calling a person who owed the money using a predictive and a preview dialing mode more than 1,000 times and left over 116 pre-recorded messages. So, through all this, even though it was a collections environment, and therefore, once again, quote-unquote, a previous relationship, the plaintiff charged that this was violation of TCPA. Now, I think what I read from some of our folks that were following this quite closely, even though this was, the Federal District Court of Wisconsin awarded $571,000 in statutory damages, some legal experts, I guess this is the key, right? Some legal experts believe this is far from conclusive, but are now calling for a solution that addresses this issue. So what I'm hearing here, what I'm looking at is that, okay, here is this obvious violation on the left, and it's a pretty severe judgment on the right. And I think the other key is, it's regardless of whether the preview dialing was outside the scope of TCPA, the question is not how the defendant made a particular call, but whether the system it used had the capability to make automated calling or automated calls. And I think that's the key. Sometimes this was done in a preview mode, sometimes it was done in a preview mode or in a predictive mode, but the point is that the device itself had the capability to do predictive dialing. And even though they may not have actually dialed it all 1,000 times in that predictive mode, it could have been in a preview mode. Because the system had that capability, that was part of the reason for the award, for the judgment against it. So this is what everybody was talking about for so long because of the huge amount. So Howard, you probably have some additional thoughts on this one as well?
Yeah, so even the last webinar that we had with David, we had talked about the fact that even in preview dialing mode, an agent would manually choose the telephone number by clicking a number on a screen, and then the system would tell, the dialer, if you will, to dial that phone number. So that basically the agent's pressing a button manually on their computer screen rather than entering the 10 digits into their telephone handset. And so this is where the court was saying that, the system they used, whether it was used as a predictive dialer or a preview dialer, it had the capacity to be used as a predictive dialer, and therefore it was a dialer and could not be used. And that was the ruling. Now, we all know that the ruling has been vacated, due to the settlement of this matter. The ruling was vacated, but it doesn't stop any other courts from bringing this back up in the future. So because people have called for a solution, and Noble wanted to be proactive about this as well as we learned about the response, we've created a solution that we believe addresses those concerns. So I'd like to just kind of step through a workflow, if you will, of what that looks like. So the wireless number treatment via the Noble Composer is a contact management application that can be used for collections, for customer service, for sales. It can be used for any different application. And whenever you have a phone number that or a record that has a wireless number that you've identified either through pre-scrubbing the records with a partner of ours like Possible Now, for example, where you can identify those phone numbers, and you don't have a record of express consent on file, you'll want to put it into a campaign with Composer Grid, and this is like a manual dial type of campaign. Now, what happens is this becomes the system that tells the agent these are records that need to be called. It is strictly a workflow engine at this point, okay? So as the agent selects individual records, as you'll see here, we'll identify that, the number's not okay to dial due to whatever complex criteria is being met. So in this case, there's maximum attempts were reached, or out of calling window, or internal compliance rules prevented this particular record from being dialed at this time. So it alerts the agent to that fact. Now, eventually, the agent will find a record that they can dial, and so this continuation of that workflow is just going to show you that the agent is essentially finding a record that they can work, and so she, at this point, will pick up her telephone handset or even a software-based soft phone and then manually dial the customer via the Noble IPBX. Now, this is what's really important. They are not clicking to dial within Noble Composer. They're not clicking to dial within a predictive dialer or anything like that. They're picking up their handset and they're dialing a particular number. Now, the Noble IPBX then queries the compliance criteria software module that is part of the Noble Contact Center, okay, to verify whether that number being dialed by the agent on the PBX matches the record on the screen, and then it performs a final check of all other compliance rules, including do not call list, flags for prior express consent, and so on. Now, only after this process is completed will the Noble IPBX receive permission from the Noble Contact Center solution that it is eligible to complete the processing of that call, again, initiated by the agent. So in this situation, we feel like this is a compliant solution because, again, the call, if we look at it from maybe a diagram perspective, the call is being originated by an agent at her workstation. It's going through the Noble PBX, which does not have the capacity to store numbers and so forth, and then is going directly to the wireless number. If we look at how the solution workflow looks in a little more detail, what we can see here is that once the agent dials a number, the PBX is going to receive that request, and it's going to use a data-only connection, to verify if it's still compliant to call at this time. Have I reached maximum attempts? Because the record is associated in multiple ways. Maybe as a wireless number, it's in a manual dialing campaign, but they're home phone number, the work number may be part of a predictive dialing campaign that's running. And so I want to manage at a record level, at an account level, my maximum attempts. And so in this way, I'm able to manage complex compliance criteria in a way that keeps me compliant in all of those other areas while still being TCPA compliant. And that's where we've really seen, as we've done our discoveries, as we've done our work with customers doing technology assessments and so forth and compliance assessments, is that even though they may be using a PBX today to stay compliant with TCPA, they're still exposing themselves to so much other risk that it then becomes a question of how do I address that. So this solution addresses both. It keeps you TCPA compliant, but also then allows you to monitor and manage, your other compliance rules. Time zone windows and things like that are also very important. I think a question that comes up repeatedly is, okay, so how do I prove that, right? How do I prove that it was the agent dialing the call and so forth? And part of that is call recording. So when you do this same solution and you utilize the call recording option, what will happen is that the call recording is established with the Noble solution, okay? Just like if you had a third-party call recorder, we're going to tap into that conversation between the agent, the PBX, and the customer, and we're going to record the entire conversation or the entire call progress from the dial tone to dial digits to call progress tones, and record both the agent and customer sides of the conversation. If for some reason the agent were to dial a number that was not compliant, and they received the PBX receives a message back saying it's not compliant to dial at this time, the PBX will play a pre-recorded message to that agent saying this call is not eligible for dialing, and that would give the reason based on whether it's maximum attempts or some other criteria. Okay. So
I would just say, Howard, I just want to make sure that, so as we were going on the beginning, there were some areas we needed to make sure that were key, right? Obviously, we're talking about consent. You talked about that. The recording obviously gives proof, because I think one of the things I mentioned in the question earlier on was the burden of proof is on the organization to prove that they were doing it correctly. So obviously, recording gives you that capability. Obviously, the Noble IP PBX, the compliance server, it doesn't store numbers. It's not a predictive dialer, so it meets that requirement. I want to make sure, did I miss any others that the requirements here, or were you going to kind of summarize that here in a second?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And, essentially, I guess to summarize it, you've got two separate solutions that are configured to work together, enabling the compliance with the Wisconsin ruling for manual dialing of wireless numbers through a Noble IPBX in this situation, which does not store calling lists. The PBX does not randomly or sequentially call those phone numbers. It's just simply not capable of making automated calls. So the compliance solution also allows the contact center to implement sophisticated compliance management safeguards, which we've talked about here, which will basically prevent the non-compliant calls from being completed. So that was kind of the main points there.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So we got a couple of summary slides, and so kind of on the left-hand side here, some of the things we talked about, in the beginning of this presentation, kind of setting up why the whole TCPA compliance issues are so important. So obviously compliance reporting, opt-out, mechanisms that we talked about, prior express consent, and existing business relationships. Those are the things that you've got to really understand how you're going to manage that for your organization to stay TCPA or FCC compliant. So, Howard, you want to take us on the right side of that slide and talk a little bit about where the Noble system, the solution here, meets these requirements on the left-hand side?
Yeah. So thank you, Henry. And so just to kind of recap what we've got to do, we've done an introduction, if you will, to three major solution components at this point that address, through Maestro, Harmony, and IVR Manager, we're addressing compliance pacing, so we're managing that abandonment rate to be less than 3%. We're managing compliance lockdown, so enforcing the call pacing and hold messaging rules by campaigning groups, preventing unauthorized users from making changes to your system. We're providing proof of and the ability to monitor compliance through the campaign detail reports. We also have automated alerting through the dashboards, email, and texting alerts through Harmony. We also talked about automated self-service, so the graphical call flow design of IVR Manager, how you can personalize that with nuanced text-to-speech, and how you can treat answering machines and live voices differently through that self-service experience. And then we also talked about how that self-service experience can automatically update those opt-out tables. So those could be exclusion lists, company-specific do-not-call lists. We can use ODBC, JDBC, or web services to update those tables. And then automatic disconnect, which was an important point. After the party has selected their opt-out, the law requires that you immediately disconnect, and so we offer that capability.
All right, perfect.
Okay. And then this was our last summary slide before the Q&A.
So, by the way, there is a quick question. Can we lock down filters? Howard, do you want to, maybe you can answer that? We were kind of going through that. You were just talking about that here a second ago.
Yes, so there's, through the system access control policies within Maestro, you have very granular controls where you can lock down access to different modules and prevent unauthorized changes to those filters and other, profiles and things like that associated with creating your list. Good question.
All right, great. So another of the TCPA guidelines here is, the equipment that originates the call, I think we talked about this a second ago, it originates the call to a wireless number cannot be an auto dialer, defined as having the capabilities, and then we got a couple of points here, right? And I think the other point that's important here on the TCPA guidelines on the left side of the slide, so not only can it not have the capability for auto dialing, and that has to do with both, human interactions, straight person-to-person calling, as well as leaving pre-recorded messages, especially without prior consent here. So it takes it to a greater degree. It's right, not just it's agent as well as blaster calls. So maybe Howard, you could take us through the Noble compliance solution on the right-hand side and how it addresses those issues.
Yeah, I think essentially here the Noble solution is going to help the organization achieve the TCPA compliance by ensuring, one, that calls to wireless numbers are dialed by a live agent on a digit-by-digit basis via the PBX, that no phone numbers or calling lists are ever stored in that PBX, and they're never randomly or sequentially generated by the PBX, and that the wireless phone numbers are not originated or dialed by the Noble Contact Center solution in this configuration. Okay? So in this way, users can configure these complex compliance criteria that the Noble solution enforces and then provides a reporting mechanism to track the actual compliance. So I guess that's how I would kind of summarize what we've just talked about in that regard.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, thank you, Howard. Let's go on to the next slide. So we're kind of getting into, we have like about 5 minutes left in our 45 minutes. So we have some questions that we have. These are questions that were submitted during registration, and like we said here, over 30 questions were submitted. We also kind of broke down what the questions cover, the areas of interest. So 40% we believe we've covered in the actual presentation. There's 23% that were really more true legalese that we would think that it wouldn't be appropriate for us to try to answer, and then we'll show you what those are. Then we've got some on the Noble solution and third-party solutions and some miscellaneous questions. So these are the ones that we're going to focus on here with the remaining time. So real quick here are some of the legal questions. So I don't necessarily need to read them to you in a status of time. But for those of you who have submitted these questions, you might want to see your in-house counsel regarding those. And every organization, of course, interprets this a little bit differently.
So, very good point there, Henry. If I might just interject that we did receive actually a number of questions that were similar around supplying templates for the wireless consent form And due to the intellectual property nature of that and the way, attorneys treat that kind of material, we really couldn't provide that here. But it's definitely something that attorneys in your organization or that you might outsource to can help you with that kind of language, as well as, I don't know, best and quickest options is more theoretical, but the actual content of a written or e-signature authorization is really something an attorney should handle, I would think.
Okay.
Your thoughts?
Perfect. All right, on the next slide.
Okay, and then, maybe just one other thought. I just noticed this, what is compliant dialless or dialing is preview dialing compliant? Well, what Nelson versus Santander showed us was that preview dialing was not necessarily compliant because it was essentially going out through a dialer. So that's why this solution requires the manual intervention from that perspective. But again, some organizations will still, utilize preview dialing, and that's a judgment call that your attorney would have to make whether it applies to you or not. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, those differences.
Oh, by the way, another submitted question, Howard, as long as we're changing slides here, we got a second. I think it's a fairly straightforward question. It says, how does the agent get the list of records to call? I'm assuming this was in the when you had the compliance slide up and you were showing the agent behind the screen. Yeah,
no, that's great. So the agent basically is going to in this case, would log into the Composer grid, which would then present a list based on the campaign that agent was logged into using Composer grid. And so that group, that could be a group of agents working a list or an individual list for a specific agent. So that's just how that's processed.
All right.
You also have the ability to implement this solution in other solutions like Titanium, a collection management platform, or Salesforce.com, or other front-end applications can be modified to do that compliance check. It doesn't have to be Noble's Composer grid, but that's one way that we can very quickly get you into that situation, into that configuration.
On these third-party questions, this really has to do mostly around cell phone, figuring out how do I know that this number is a cell phone, things like that. And so why don't you? I think we have a partnership with Possible now, so maybe Howard, you could talk about that real quick.
Yeah, so I would just encourage you to visit our partner, and if you're working with us, your sales team, the Noble sales team can also engage that partnership at www.possiblenow.com. And they are really a company that provides enterprise preference management solutions that let marketers personalize multi-channel communications. That's right from their website. And essentially what they do is they provide authoritative lists on wireless numbers as well as the national and state do not call registries. And you can subscribe to that. You can subscribe to different levels of the subscription to have different scheduled updates to that. You can do real-time batch processing prior to it ever hitting the dialer itself or the list management application. And then you can also do that in real time. So even for numbers that you're not sure about, if that maybe you haven't scrubbed those numbers and you want to scrub them in real time for like an active lead generation program or something to that effect, you can do that in real time with the subscription and an integration to Noble's Enterprise Contact Center.
All right. All right. Next slide, Howard. A couple of fairly straightforward questions here. We should be able to get through these pretty quickly. First one, how do these changes impact OnQ? For those of you who don't know, OnQ is a product that we have that we through one of our acquisitions last year. And it's for large campaign management and the call sort of thing. So, Howard,
yeah. So I think this is a natural fit for OnQ. OnQ automatically supports multimodal campaigns, including manual dial campaigns versus predictive dialer campaigns versus best time to call and so forth and best channel. And so I think this is a natural fit with OnQ. Obviously, there's details that we'd have to go through in terms of configuring it, but it's a natural fit, I believe.
All right. Obviously, the question about hosted, the answer is obviously it's is this available on our hosted system? The answer there is pretty straightforward. Yes, it is. What's unique about Noble is whether it's hosted or premise, our solutions are the same. So,
yeah, well said.
Next question: how do we determine if we are utilizing the Noble dialer to ensure we are in compliance with TCPA? So obviously, I think that's a great question. So you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is just, it's a free call to your local friendly Noble sales account manager, and, just reach out to them and say, hey, are we utilizing this system right? Or we'll engage a sales engineer or solution engineer to go out there and determine, do you have the solution already or the components necessary? Most likely, if you don't have the solution that I've described, you're going to know it. So we can go out there and then give you a proposal and help you understand how to transition into that configuration.
And let's see, the last question on the page is, can you merge the data and results from this solution with calling landlines on other campaigns using normal modes of dialing?
Yes, so that's one of the nice things about the solution is that the combined reporting is part of the Noble solution. By utilizing the Noble IPDX and the way we do and the communication that we can do through the data-only connection, we can now then track that agent's performance in these campaigns. And that's another thing that's missing from, just picking up a PBX and, dialing numbers. Not only do you put yourself at risk for all of the myriad of other compliance criteria, but you also have no way to really report on that other than just, your standard call detail reporting that's in a PBX. That's usually not sufficient. So we do have combined reporting available.
Great. All right, now the last slide here. So we're coming down to the end here. So we've got 2 more questions. We'll go through them real quickly. I know we're a little bit over, but we do want to get through these. Does this solution still allow an agent to press a button, similar to preview mode, to make calls without having to input?
Okay. So obviously from the Nelson versus Santander perspective, the solution is not going to allow a preview dial or press a button to dial type of solution based on the ruling of the courts. That part of the solution would not have that capability. However, you still have the Noble Enterprise Contact Center solution that has that capability to do click-to-call and preview dialing. And so if your legal team determines that that's necessary to, or that it's accessible to do preview dialing for your type of calling campaign or click-to-call, then we have a solution that does not necessarily involve the Noble IPDX.
All right. How does Noble Technology take into account for a customer who now is in California but with a Georgia phone number? Ironically enough, that's exactly what was my situation. I've got a Georgia phone number from Noble, but I live in California. So how do we address those situations?
That's great. So we have what we kind of affectionately call a safe harbor time zone dialing check, and it can check both the zip code or postal code and the phone number, and when it'll basically pick the best calling window or the most conservative calling window, let's say, so that you're not calling too early for California or too late for Georgia. It's going to automatically address that based on those 2 criteria.
Right. Perfect. So yeah, you're just making that window a little smaller.
That's right.
So you make sure you're not messing that up. Okay, and the last question. So do you think that manual dialing through an IP PBX is not using an automated dialing system? That kind of.
Okay. Yeah, that was interestingly worded. The manual dialing through the Noble IPDX solution in our TCPA wireless compliance solution does not store calling lists. It does not randomly or sequentially call those phone numbers, and it's just not capable of making automated calls. And that's why we believe that it is not an automated telephone dialing system. However, as in the case with the question before, where you're checking, for a safe harbor time zone, like the calling window that's in a unique situation, there's all of these other criteria that have to be managed, and that's why we feel like our solution is superior to just manual dialing through a PBX, because you can have that total compliance capability.
Well, great. I think that's a great way to end it. So you want to So we'd like to thank everyone for the time. Like I said, we ran over about 5 minutes, but hopefully you found the extra 5 minutes worth it. We were going through some Q&A. We answered the questions that came in live as well as the ones that came in through registration. Kind of as I said before, we will be putting the recording of the session on our website. It'll be a few days before we get it up there, so those of you who want to hear it again or point some of your colleagues to it, please do. We look forward to that. And I think that's it for me. I want to thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciated the opportunity, and thank you so much for focusing. Howard, let you say your goodbyes as well.
Okay, thank you again for your interest, everyone, and feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect. Speakers, please hold the line.